It's time now for the award-winning #1 local talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, The Sam Lesante Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lesante.
Well, folks, it all starts July 22nd and 23rd this year. And where does it start? It starts at Sand Springs Country Club. And what's it all about? It's about the empowerment of the Alpha Wolf Conference. It has to do with the Lupus Foundation of Pennsylvania. Now, here's the exciting thing, folks. For those of you who were there last year, you know what kind of great speakers they get. Well, this year, it's going to even be better. Joining me today on the set is Cindy Dolon, who is the Lackawanna and Luzerne representative for Lupus. And on the phone, we have Dr. Andrew Newberg. Now, Dr. Andrew Newberg is the Director of Research at the Jefferson Myrna Brind Center of Integrative Medicine. Now, the interesting thing about Dr. Newberg is he does neurotheology. His subject this year is how God changes your brain, which I find very interesting. Now, the good doctor has been on 2020, Nightline, Good Morning America, and it was written up in Oprah magazine. It was on the Sam Lesante Show last year, and I'm very happy to have you again. Doctor, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
Good. I find this interesting. First of all, neurotheology. What is that, doctor?
Well, it's really the study that links the human brain to our religious and spiritual selves, and it's trying to understand really that relationship from both directions. It is not the scientific study of religion, but it's also not a kind of religious interpretation of science. But to me, it's really how the two relate to each other and how we can learn about ourselves by looking at that relationship.
This year's subject is how God changes your brain, okay? Explain a little bit about that.
Well, you know, it's obviously it's a huge topic because the notion of God, the notion of religious and spiritual beliefs have a tremendous impact on our brain, and conversely, our brain has an impact on the way in which we believe things. And that's really what has led me to doing a lot of the research that I've been involved in over the last 15, 20 years. A lot of it most specifically involves how we use different brain scan equipment to take pictures of what's going on in the brain of people when they are engaged in different religious and spiritual practices, like meditation, prayer, speaking in tongues, and a variety of other practices that we've been fortunate enough to have an opportunity to look at. But we've also realized that it's not just an understanding of what's going on in the brain, but it's also an understanding of what we really mean when we talk about things like God, when we talk about religion and spirituality. One of the things that I do with a lot of the students who I teach is I ask them, well, what do you think religion actually is? What do you think spirituality actually is? What do you think God actually is? And it's fascinating to hear all the differences that people, the different descriptions that people come up with, the different words. And so we've tried to get at that kind of question as well, because it's ultimately, it's fundamentally important for us to understand what people really mean when they say, I feel spiritual, I feel religious, so that we can then better understand what's going on within them, inside their brain, inside their body, when they have that kind of an experience. So there's really, it's a broad field of study, and there is a tremendous amount of information and data that we have an opportunity to look at, a lot of which we've already gotten to, but we've also just scratched the surface in many ways.
Now, do you find any difference in any spiritual group, for example, religious group? Do you find a difference if you're talking to Catholic students, Protestant students, Jewish students, people who don't have a religion? Do you find any difference in attitudes when you're discussing that with them?
Well, I think it really does depend a lot on the given individual. Certainly each tradition has their own belief system and the things that are important to them, which may be a little bit different than other traditions. But when we actually start to look into the brain itself, some of the things that we have noticed, for example, is that those individuals, those people who take from religious and spiritual ideas a very emotional standpoint, for example, they feel that love and compassion and so forth are the most important ideas, then we tend to see changes in the areas of the brain that are involved in that kind of an experience. Our emotional centers, the areas that are involved in helping us to be compassionate and empathic towards other people. When we look at people who have an experience where they feel deeply connected or at one with God, at one with the universe, at one with absolute, whatever they consider to be sacred or absolute reality, then we tend to see changes going on in an area of the brain that helps us to create our sense of self and how that self relates to the world. What seems to be the case is it may not necessarily be the specifics of a given ideology or doctrine, but the more general aspects of how that becomes incorporated into a person's life. How do they utilize those ideas that has an impact on their brain? But what we do know is that when people do engage these kinds of spiritual practices like meditation and prayer, it definitely changes the brain. It changes the brain in the moment. And it also, if people do these practices over prolonged periods of time, months, years, lifetimes, then that also has a very profound impact on how the human brain functions.
You also mentioned here, and it'll be in your talk on July 22nd, and you just said this, but I'll just, not only do prayer and spiritual practice reduce stress and anxiety, but just 12 minutes of meditation per day may slow down the aging process.
Well, right. I mean, when we start to think about how these practices work for us, a lot of the research is showing the benefits of them on a very practical level. When people do practices like meditation, which often have become very secularized, so people who are not particularly religious or spiritual can still benefit from doing these practices, that they seem to lower rates of depression, anxiety levels in people, and there is some evidence to show that they may actually enhance the way our brain and body function. Some interesting work that's been done actually by another group has shown that these kinds of meditation practices actually have an impact on the genetic level. They actually increase what are called telomeres, which are kind of the ends of the DNA, and it's believed that as these telomeres break down, that contributes to the aging process, so that theoretically, if a meditation practice helps to build them back up, these telomeres back up, it may actually slow the aging process itself. And so, obviously, we still need to go a long way to truly understand how and when these types of practices can have an impact on us. But yes, I mean, they seem to have a lot of different benefits depending on the person, depending on the practice, and depending on how that person ultimately incorporates that into their life.
So in your research, Doctor, have you found when you're looking at recoveries from either surgeries or any kind of cancer or whatever, have you found in your research that those people who are spiritual, those people who pray, versus those people who do not pray and could care less about God, are there faster recoveries, or are they the same? I don't know if there's any research that's been done in those areas.
There hasn't been a lot that has specifically addressed that question. However, what we do know is that people who are religious and spiritual, when they turn to those beliefs, when they turn to the practices that are an important part of their lives, it does help them to cope more effectively with the illnesses and the issues that they're facing, surgeries and so forth. It helps them to reduce their stress and anxiety around that. There's some evidence to support the fact that people who are more religious or spiritual, if they can find that as part of their coping approach, will actually be more compliant with existing treatments, and in that regard, they can ultimately do better. But in terms of whether or not, I don't believe that there's anything that proves one way or another that being religious or not being religious is going to inherently improve your outcome. And part of the problem is that it's a difficult thing for science to show. A lot of the studies that have even shown the kinds of things that we're talking about are usually looking at large populations of people. So, you look at 1,000 people who are religious and 1,000 people who are not religious, and you find out that those people who are religious tend to do a little bit better. But certainly there are religious people who don't do as well, and certainly there are non-religious people who do very well. But as a general statement, when people can turn to these very important beliefs that are used for coping and dealing with the various stresses and problems that people face, they can be very effective and they can be very helpful for people.
Okay, I'll take a break right now, Doctor. Stay with us. I'm talking to Dr. Andrew Newberg, folks. He is going to be one of the main speaker July 22nd. And the event is the empowerment of the Alpha Wolf. It's the conference. It's the Lupus Foundation. Cindy's on set. We'll be talking to Cindy a little bit later on, but he'll be there July 22nd. We'll give you more details. But here's another thing. Come back. I want to talk to Doctor about this. He talks about how God changes your brain in both work of modern medicine and a practical guide for readers to enhance their physical and emotional health and to avoid mental decline. Does that help with dementia? Does it help with Alzheimer's? And how important is that? How important really is spirituality in your life? This is good stuff. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show, folks. Remember, 24/7, you can watch all of our shows on ssptv.com. My email, sam@ssptv.com. I'm Sam Lesante. Today, folks, we're talking to Dr. Andrew Newberg. He is the Director of Research at the Jefferson Myrna Brind Center of Integrative Medicine in Neurotheology. And we're talking about how God can change your brain. Also on my set today is Cindy Dolon, who is the representative for the Lackawanna Luzerne Lupus Foundation. There's a conference coming up July 22nd, of which Dr. Newberg will be there, and also a lot happening on the 23rd, and Cindy will tell us about that when we talk with her. But meanwhile, talking to you, Doctor, let's talk about this here, how God changes your brain in both a work of modern science and a practical guide for readers to enhance their physical and emotional health and to avoid mental decline. Now, we're looking at dementia here, Alzheimer's. Are people who are spiritual and pray and meditate less likely to get Alzheimer's or dementia, or will it help? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think it will ultimately help, and again, I think it helps on multiple levels. Coming down with something like a disease like Alzheimer's disease can be very stressful. It can be stressful for the person, can be stressful for certainly the caregivers and the family members. So when people have a spiritual base to turn to, that can be very helpful for them, and they can find a way of helping to better cope with the whole situation and find ways of basically trying to keep themselves as healthy as possible. Now, again, part of what our actual research has shown is that when you do practices like meditation, for example, that this actually helps to enhance the way the brain functions. It's a little bit like doing exercise for the brain, and that this may actually help to improve the memory of a person and may help to improve the brain's function so that it can actually be beneficial in terms of how a person actually does with regard to dealing with a disease like Alzheimer's. Now, again, there's still no cure for Alzheimer's, so I don't think it's going to stop the process or reverse the process per se, but it does definitely seem to help people and can be very beneficial for people who are dealing with that kind of situation.
It's interesting to note that we really don't know, how much prayer and spirituality could help you, because here's a situation sometimes. I'm a firm believer in support groups. When a person who is sick, who has any kind of sickness, they need support. And if they can't get it from their families or their friends, there are a lot of people who are alone. And I think when you're alone, I think there is where, as God says, you're never alone if you have prayer and if you have God in your life. What do you think about that statement, Dr. Newberg?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when we talk a lot about the potential benefits that people derive from a religious tradition, they're really multifactorial. And you mentioned one very important one, which is social support. And we know that by other data that people who have better social support networks, that they are the people who tend to do better with different illnesses. They have people who can get them to appointments, who can help them deal with the stress and so forth, help take care of them when they're at home and they're not feeling well. And so, and plus just emotionally, people do better. So they tend to feel better and actually do better with their illnesses. Now, religious and spiritual beliefs also have all the practices that we've been talking about, practices like meditation, prayer, different rituals that can be very important to a person and can provide them a sense of comfort and a sense of coping. So that's another element of religious and spiritual beliefs. Some religious and spiritual beliefs have promote very healthy lifestyle kinds of practices. So, most religious traditions will tell you to not drink too much alcohol, not do too many high-risk things, not be promiscuous, A lot of them have dietary practices where they try to limit the amounts of some of the bad foods that we as doctors keep telling people to avoid, like the red meats and saturated fats, and get to a more natural diet. So if people follow a lot of those different prescriptions that are a part of different religious traditions, they can be very helpful and very beneficial for Alzheimer's, for cancer, for other types of disorders. And so, when people do have a strong relationship with their spiritual or religious tradition, I think it's very important for them to try to connect with that and to utilize it in a way that can be beneficial, not just for the religious or spiritual purposes, but for their overall sense of well-being.
In your research, it's amazing how in some of your books, and folks, as speaking to Dr. Newberg, you could see on the screen his email and a phone number. Just could go to his website or the email, and has interesting books. Getting back to neurotheology, okay, and the connection between God, your brain, and healing. I feel sorry for people who do not believe in God. I feel sorry for people who do not have any spirituality. Can't tell you how many times on my show, Doctor, people have told me how either members of their family or they themselves have been helped through prayer, and how prayer has in some cases performed miracles for people. I know 2 specific people who had brain cancer and were told this is it. However, the prayer groups that were out there prayed, and for some miracle these tumors reduced and disappeared. Now, I'm not saying they cannot come back. So,
right.
Re-emphasizing the need for prayer for those people who do not believe in God, do not believe in prayer and meditation. What would you say to them in a group setting?
Well, I think ultimately everybody needs to find meaning and purpose in their life and find some way of connecting to the world in an effective way. Obviously, religious and spiritual beliefs are a wonderful way of doing that, and I certainly understand your point is very well taken, that when people do have that religious and spiritual background, that can be an incredibly powerful and incredibly positive thing for them. For people who don't quite get religion, that doesn't mean that they can't completely be without any kind of sense of connectedness to the world, derive benefits from practices like meditation. But yes, I think to some degree one of the things that we've learned about in terms of our practices is that when a practice really has its best effect is usually when a person feels very strongly about it, when it's a part of their lives, when it's a part of the way they do things, when they truly believe in it. And so when you have that very deep inner value, that very strong belief that is positive for you, then it can be very, very beneficial. And so when people can find that path, it can be very powerful for them. And if they can't find a specific religious tradition path, then as we see today, many people who state that they are atheists and they don't believe in God, they still try to find a spiritual path. They still do yoga, meditation. They're looking for that connection in some form or another, even if they can't find it in the more traditional religious traditions.
I'd like for you to comment on this, maybe in 2 minutes. Andrew, it says here, Andrew has been asking, that's you, Andrew has been asking questions about reality, truth, and God since he was very young, and he has long been fascinated by the human mind and its complex workings. Give me a little review on that statement, Andrew.
Well, yes. I think part of why I got into all of this in the first place stems back from when I was very young, and I was always raised to ask a lot of questions and to explore and try to understand the world around us, and I was very confused at a lot because you look out at the world and you try to make some sense out of it, and then you listen to people describe their interpretation of the world, oftentimes these descriptions are in very stark contrast to other descriptions, and you have different religious traditions, different political ideologies, different moral philosophies. And to me, I kept thinking, well, how do people keep coming away with all these different perspectives on the world when theoretically we're all looking at the same reality? And so I started to ask a lot of questions about how do we as human beings understand that reality? How do we make sense out of it? It's part of what led me down the path of understanding the human brain, because clearly our brain has a lot to do with how we make sense of reality. But it seems to me that it's more than just that, and it's more than just what science can say. And to some degree, it's more than just what religious or spiritual traditions can say. I think it's something that really requires a very integrated approach that utilizes the best of all of our faculties and all of our abilities to try to come to some greater answer. And that's part of why I've fallen into the discussion about neurotheology as this kind of multidisciplinary, integrative approach that seeks to bring the best of what science can offer, the best of what religious and spiritual traditions can offer, to help us really answer that big question about what is the real nature of reality and what are we as human beings supposed to be doing.
Well, today's your lucky day, Dr. Newberg. I have your answer.
You got the answer?
I have the answer for you, okay?
Sounds good.
And I want you to know, you don't have to send me any money for this. I'm just going to give it as free advice to you. Every question that you have is answered, and there's one book, it's called the Bible. And I've been told many times, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, no matter what it is, the answers to all of your concerns and problems are in that book, the Bible, and I find it quite interesting. Doctor, I'm looking forward to seeing you July 22nd at the Sand Springs Country Club for this conference, Lupus. Thank you for taking the time and giving me a call. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on your program. Appreciate it.
We'll see you on July 22nd, okay?
Great.
Thank you. Folks, that's Dr. Andrew Newberg. He is the Director of Research at the Jefferson Myrna Brind Center of Integrative Medicine, Neurotheology. Isn't it interesting, folks, how God can change changes your brain and can make you happier, make you healthier, help you with dementia, help you with Alzheimer's. God knows how much else can be done by the fact that you have a little prayer in your life. Isn't it interesting, folks? And yet Hollywood's trying to take God out of our society. Isn't this interesting? We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show, folks. There's a major event happening on July 22nd, 23rd. It's the Empowerment of the Alpha Wolf conference. It has to do with lupus. Cindy Dolon is here on my set. Cindy, let's talk about lupus a little bit. What is it?
Well, basically, it's an autoimmune disease. What that means is your body no longer recognizes itself and it starts attacking your organs as if it was a virus or bacteria. And basically, it hits people between the ages of 14 to 45, most autoimmune diseases, and it can attack any organ in the body, your blood, your brain, your heart, your lung, your kidneys. And it could be organ-specific, such as like diabetes, which hits the pancreas, or systemic, like lupus, which hits any organ in your body.
Now, you have lupus.
Yes.
Okay. And how long have you had lupus?
Well, I've had it since I was in high school, but I didn't get diagnosed until around the year 2000.
And so, what are you taking, or how you cope with this?
Well, there's many ways to cope. First of all, you have to have the proper diagnosis. Then you get the medication that you need. And medications can range from rash, creams, all the way up to taking chemotherapy agents. I'm on steroids for the most part. And I also believe in prayer. Prayer also helps me to cope. If I was not and have God in my life, I'd be in serious trouble.
Now, Cindy, the fact that this conference, okay, and we just heard Dr. Newberg, right, and he'll be there July 22nd.
Exactly.
What's happening on July 23rd?
Okay, 23rd is when we're going to actually have professionals in the medical community come in and talk about various topics related to autoimmunity. We have an endocrine doctor coming in, endocrinologist, to talk about thyroid disorders, disorders such as diabetes, which is an autoimmune disease of the pancreas. We also have a Dr. Schleicher coming in to talk about skin diseases such as like pemphigus, psoriatic arthritis, those conditions that affect the skin. We're also going to have a presentation on your immune system, on lupus itself, and also we're going to have a special ed teacher to come in to talk about how coping with students in a classroom with autoimmune diseases. So it's going to be a wide range of topics, and it's only going to cost $20 for lupus patients and their families, $30 for the general public, and that includes a breakfast, lunch, and snacks included with the price of you go into the discussions. The
22nd, though, is the night where
Dr. Newberg is going to come on the 22nd. Right. It's going to be a banquet at Sand Springs Country Club. Comes with a full buffet meal. He'll be presenting that evening, and it'll be from 6 to 8:30. You'll get a full buffet meal with the talk, and we're going to have door prizes. And also, he's bringing some of his books that he'll autograph and talk to people about.
Okay, now if you would like to get in contact with Cindy, it's 570-956-0072. Now, for those of you who are watching the show, we're playing this, of course, before July 22nd, 23rd. However, because of the content of the show with Dr. Newberg, I will be playing the show throughout the year. So if you're watching the show and it's September and we're talking about July 22nd, 23rd, please understand that I think the first part of the show is extremely important for a lot of people and helping a lot of people cope with life, and how he talks about how God changes your brain. You've seen this in your life, right?
Absolutely. Well, a lot of my support group members, the people that are more spiritual seem to do more successful with their diagnosis and their coping mechanisms. We call our support group FAITH, facing autoimmune together head on, because we all believe that spirituality is a very important part of healing and coping with our illnesses. None of us are of the same faith, but we all believe in God in one aspect or another. And I do see in my own life that I've had many miracles happen to me and through prayer, and I do believe firmly that God is a very much a firm part of how I am dealing with what I have to deal with. And I thank Sammy for allowing us to have this on his show, because it is so important that we get the word out.
You're a beautiful person, Cindy. You do a lot of great good, and what you're doing for lupus is fabulous, and I applaud you for that. Really, I do. Cindy Donleth, folks, she's no stranger. She's been on SSP TV many times, and we'll be on to talk about lupus, because the more you know, the better off it is. But remember this conference, July 22nd with Dr. Newberg, and July 23rd. Phone number for Cindy is 956-0072, area code 570. Give her a call. We hope you've enjoyed the program. I highly recommend that you tell people we're on 24/7 SSP TV all over the world, but also on the different cable companies. I highly suggest you have people watch the show, particularly listening to Dr. Newberg. We'll see you next time.